Hey everyone, welcome to episode 5 of the Obvious podcast. My name is Sonny. I'm the CEO of ABC East Coast Florida.
And I'm Peter Dyga, the president and CEO of Associated Builders and Contractors Florida East Coast Chapter. Welcome to this episode of The Obvious. As said before, The Obvious podcast is a production of ABC Florida East Coast Chapter, and unless otherwise stated, all content reflects the opinions of
The host.
the guests and the hosts. So, welcome.
This episode is part 2 of our last episode, which we ran out of time. And in that episode, we were discussing Vice President Harris's economic proposals and the impact that they are widely accepted to have should she get elected into office. And one of the things that we had talked about was sort of this proclivity that politicians have when they propose bad ideas to say, oh, but it only affects a small sliver of the population. And one of the things we're going to show you in this episode are some clips where one of her economic advisors did an interview with CNBC, and we're going to show you some of the things that he said that, frankly, are terrifying. You know, you think about sort of the investment climate that exists in the U.S., the ecosystem that exists where people are able to take risks, invest their capital, earn a gain, and get ready for retirement and get ready for financial prosperity. That is really put at risk when the government decides that it gets to pick winners and losers, and when the government decides that it gets a bigger share of what you have achieved through your hard work and success.
There's that saying that I like a lot that I forget, it seems like it was coined in recent history about government should not be in the business of picking winners and losers, right?
Yeah, that's a relatively recent.
And when they start doing that, you know, it's a good sure sign that they've overstretched or overreached, you know. So, you know, I wanted to also point out, Sonny, that if you're listening to this, you probably have some interest in politics and policy and whatnot, and we would encourage all of you, if you're not an active, engaged member of the chapter, that reach out, get more engaged. ABC coined a phrase many years ago, one of our leaders, get into politics or get out of business. So it's really in our DNA, you know, at ABC.
It is.
Vice President Pence, I think, also at a conference of ABC's a few years back, said that ABC is the Marine Corps of politics. You know, and I think everybody understands when somebody says that or makes that analogy what the point they're trying to make. Mm-hmm. You know, in terms of our leadership, in terms of being thought leaders and being the first on the beach, so to speak, you know, first on that political beach. So, you know, the things we talk about here, and we try to make sure we are tying them all into, you know, the merit shop and the free markets that, you know, are at the core of who ABC is. So we encourage you to, you know, get involved, you know, because you are our strength, you know, in terms of membership and being engaged and making sure that we stay true, you know, to that mission. So
Absolutely. And one of the things that I've learned in my life is that bureaucracies and politicians are an endless sea of bad ideas. They don't stop. And if you don't have organizations like ABC on the other side, if you are not fighting bad ideas, if you're not deconstructing bad philosophies and bad perspectives, they will win. And if they win, we all suffer. This country suffers.
And sometimes it's easy to lose sight of the fact that the rest of the world is not like the U.S.
Absolutely.
I mean, there are parts of the world where these basic ideas and philosophies of the merit shop and free markets are still struggling to be heard through the noise, you know,
right,
if you will. There's good data out there, you know, about how, and in fact, ABC is doing a social media campaign, you know, based again on the strategic direction our leadership has given us, you know, to drive home the point that meritocracy it's true. Right? Ronald Reagan's old saying, even though they try to ridicule it, that a rising tide lifts all boats. I mean, it's so true.
Yeah.
And the fact is that even the poorest of the poor, I think, in our country, live a life and a lifestyle and whatnot much better than most of the world, you know. But still, to your point, you have to work on that. You know,
do.
And that's, you know, it has been ABC's role since its inception in 1950, you know, to try to protect the free markets. ABC's foundation, you know, goes back to a small group of contractors that, in part, couldn't get their employees educated in an apprenticeship program because the unions kind of had a hold on that. So in any event, that's why this is pertinent, because the bad ideas constantly come up, right?
Yep.
And we talked, I think, in previous episodes about there's not a lot of detail there about what a Harris administration would do. But there are some ideas, and when they tell us, we should be paying attention.
We should be paying attention.
We should be paying attention.
One of the things, before we dive into some of her policy proposals, one of the things you just reminded me when you talked about how precious freedom is and how the rest of the world, some of these ideas are like struggling to just even germinate. I remember a quote from Reagan, and I feel like we're turning into a Reagan quote society here, but it was something to the extent of like, if you lose freedom here, where do you go, right? What's left? And I think about what happened during COVID, especially in Canada, where pastors ended up in jail for having a church service, or truckers had their banking relationships ended, who couldn't bank anywhere because the government of Canada said, no, this trucker is out there transporting goods in the middle of COVID. You're banned from banking with this person. I mean, they took mom and pop businesses and threw them in jail, made them a pariah in the banking community. They got them debanked. I mean, Canada is lost. Like, Canada will never be a prosperous free country the way the U.S. is. The taxes are high, healthcare is a mess, but the way freedom is treated in this world, it is precious and it is constantly under attack. So if you don't understand that, and you don't understand all of the ways they're coming after your freedoms, you're going to lose it. You are going to lose it. And they have done a really great job of indoctrinating our children. Democracy doesn't even rank when they poll young people on things that are important. Freedom doesn't even rank when they talk about those things, I remember seeing some, when there was all this talk about banning TikTok, people were willing to give up the right to vote to not lose TikTok, and it's scary, and that's why you got to pay attention. And that's what we want to do here. We want to bring these things to your attention so you understand what is out there in the ether. We get it. You're busy. There's a lot happening. Everybody's competing for your attention. Everybody's competing for your mind. Everybody's competing for headspace. But these are important issues. And one of the things that we're going to play a clip for you that came up that was proposed by the potential Harris administration is a tax on unrealized gain. Peter, do you want to tell them what unrealized gain is?
Unrealized gain. So I was wondering when this proposal came out that if I proposed annually on April 15th, I sent a letter to the IRS and said, here's your unrealized taxes. I'll pay you at a future date. That
That's
probably
right.
wouldn't go over too well.
They would not.
But unrealized, you sometimes wonder, do they even understand the English language? Right. I mean, the word in and of itself explains everything you need to know. You haven't actually, and there's been a lot of ink already spilled about this and airtime and whatnot. A lot of people that rightly point out, to use simple numbers, if I bought a stock today worth 10 and it went up to 20 and the Harris administration wants to tax me on that 10, that 100% increase, say the day after I pay the taxes on that, the stock goes down to 5.
Yeah, what does happen? Do you get your money back?
Exactly.
Right.
Do we get a refund on that? They're very light on those details.
Yeah.
But they've been specific enough on some of the details that we need to think about the implications here. So again, we're fond of saying, I love talking about what is the thinking behind it.
Yeah.
It's not just, sure, we can have a great conversation about the macro effect. And in fact, they usually don't want to talk about the macro. They'll talk about, more micro things to try to minimize the potential impact. We very rarely have a good conversation about if it were to happen, what are the unintended consequences? But on top of that, the thing that we almost never have a conversation about is what is the thinking behind this that makes even proposing such a nice. And this is the things that we, again, to our point, there's not a lot of detail, there's not a lot of meat on the bone. That's what a lot of people who want to get elected try to do. Why give specifics? If we can message it right and make you feel good, joy.
All right, so let me play this clip for you so that you can feel the joy.
Am I going to feel a lot of joy?
You're going to feel a lot of joy when you listen to this.
will cut their taxes and Democrats won't.
Let me address that very point. Andrew Lotz, in this Wall Street Journal story, says, and he's an associate director at the Bipartisan Policy Center, says, these would represent sea changes in how we have taxed wealthy individuals and families over the last several decades, and that's not an argument for or against them, but these are sea changes. This is not what we've seen under President Clinton or others, and a big part of that is taxing unrealized gains. Under the Harris plan, capital gains for households making at least $1 million would be taxed at ordinary income. Unrealized capital gains above $5 million per person exclusion would be taxed at death. That tax would have some exemptions for family businesses, but you are talking about taxing unrealized gains at levels that we haven't seen in the past, have never seen before.
At levels you've never seen before. And the phrase sea change, right? It's a sea change of a policy proposal.
No doubt it is. I mean, I think in my lifetime, a lot of things, and I think some politicians are very smart about this, is to propose sea change. Maybe even believing you're not really going to get that, but you move the conversation a little bit. Right. So now, to come back and say something less of the sea change that they were proposing is now seems nominal or seems okay. I think that's the game we sometimes play, and what we're trying to draw attention to here is pay more attention to the thinking behind some of these proposals, the macro impact or effects of it.
Yep.
The idea, first off, that something that you haven't even really realized, you haven't even really, you haven't even really made the money.
Yep.
Until you sell, those products, if you will. So that in and of itself.
And not to mention, you're buying that investment with money that's already been taxed. Just, throwing it out there for philosophical discussion. Tax money, buying an investment, and then the gain is taxed as it is now when you sell, right? You sell that investment, you sell the stock, you sell the real estate, then it gets taxed.
Right. And then back to the macro effects too. What is the point of this in economies? It's to provide capital for companies to start, to expand, to be creative. Yep. When you start, so much in economics is about, and even the merit shop, right, or the free markets, it's about incentives. Who's incentivized or disincentivized? And again, the thinking behind something that, yes, is a huge sea change. And again, maybe they're not looking for that. They're just looking to move it, a little, the argument or the
or just make the concept palatable.
Exactly,
right?
That's a great.
So it doesn't pass now, but it's palatable, so that in 5 years when it's discussed again, this is not new. We talked about this 5 years ago.
Exactly. Right. So I mean, I would argue, the right of center needs to start making, equal.
Right.
Like for me, I've often wondered, why is it okay for somebody that's because it's over 5 million to treat them a certain way,
right?
As opposed to everybody else,
right?
So.
Bad ideas vary based on your income.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, exactly. Bad ideas are okay as long as we're only impacting people we don't like.
Right. Exactly.
So
I'm going to play for you this guy, this advisor's defense, and how he reacts to the reporter's questions, and then let's talk about that. Okay.
Look, deficit spending is an issue. The reason that we're coming up with these Social Security problems and the like is because we knew that the spending was going to have to go up. We haven't dealt with that. We have not had anybody sit down who takes a look at both spending and revenue and says this is a problem on both sides and we need to get something done. We've had years and years to talk about this. We've had years and years to do something. Nothing has been done. My biggest problem is with unrealized gains. And you can go back again and say that this is only for people who make over $100 million. That clearly doesn't impact me, is not going to be an issue when I'm looking at these things. But when the first American income tax was put in place in 1861, it was a flat 3% tax on all incomes over $800. We know how that has changed over time. Unrealized gains, taxing unrealized gains just doesn't seem fair in any sense of the word. In the very best sense, if you are taxing unrealized gains, all you're doing is pulling forward the taxes that would be paid later when someone actually sells the stock.
I think that this reaction to unrealized gains is a little funny, given that I bet that the majority of people watching right now are already paying a tax on unrealized gains. It's called a property tax.
Property tax.
When the value
Property
of your
tax
home
is a
goes
use
up,
tax.
That's an
When-
old.
It's a use
that's
tax.
an
when,
old
when the
road.
value
you're
of your
paying
home
for
goes up, you
schools.
pay
It's
higher taxes
tiring.
even if you
And
don't
it doesn't
sell your
go,
home.
your value of your home never moves the way
Not the
a stock
same.
moves, the way something
That's
else
always the
moves that you
go-to
don't sell.
answer.
It's also, property tax is a use tax. You're paying for the schools, you're paying for emergency services. Those are things that make absolute sense.
And
Now,
Wow.
it's a fascinating discussion, and I understand Becky Quick from CNBC. I understand her point. She's right. It's a use tax, but I wish they would have said property tax is problematic. It is unconstitutional. If it's a use tax, if the value of my house goes up, am I enrolling more children in school, or am I using the roads more? Am I using more emergency services? Am I calling 911 more? My firefighters are coming to my house more? The idea that my property, which was bought with tax money, goes up in value, and I have to pay more to the government because it goes up in value, is insane.
Not to mention the fact that some states, Florida included, for a long time, have recognized the insanity of this and have put in place limitations on how much that can go up because
Yeah.
they realize, that those unrealized gains are not something that's fair to be taxed.
Exactly.
How many Floridians, or how many of you listening to this podcast, would like to throw out in Florida? It was called Save Our Homes, I think.
Yep.
Where the property tax appraiser or the tax collector. Is limited to how much they can assess the value of your property.
They can't raise it more than 3% a year.
Right. So in any event, stupid ideas, and just because they're bold or a sea
Right.
change, doesn't make them, any better, or good ideas.
You know how
Two
much I
wrongs don't
hate.
make a right.
You know how much I hate whataboutism, right? Somebody makes a point, and you're like, "But what about that?" And you make a completely different point on a completely different topic. Drives me nuts. This advisor is doing the same thing. He has a terrible idea, and he's defending it with another terrible idea.
Yes, it's a great point.
And to me, that is ludicrous. And so, these guys at CNBC are very smart. I respect them, and I get their point that it's a use tax. But to me, I wish somebody would have said, "No, you're right. Property tax is a tax on unrealized gain, and it's ludicrous, right? But at least property taxes go down if the values go down, right? And how are they going to accommodate for that? What happens when the stock price goes down?
Not to mention, and again, do you think this is going to be the difference between your groceries going down and your gas prices going down? Is our problem really that government doesn't spend enough, or that it's not big enough? Is this really our problem? But again, back to not just taking things or proposals or ideas at the face value, but the thinking behind it. And the thinking behind this is there is no size of government that's big enough.
Right.
None for certain people on the left of the political spectrum.
And frankly, I think there's a lot of hatred for capitalism. On that entire side,
That's a
freedom
dirty little secret.
and capitalism are despised, right? Because under capitalism, you cannot guarantee outcome. And to them, because you can't guarantee outcome, it drives them nuts. And it drives their base nuts. And it just doesn't crack me up. I find it tragic that there's 40% of the country.
Even though we kind of do in our society, in our
Right.
capitalism, we do kind of guarantee certain minimum outcomes. This is why we created Social Security and why we have Medicare and Medicaid. And again, a good part of the current conversation about who is going to be our future leader, president of the free world, and we have a lot of other smaller decisions below that for Congress and the U.S. Senate. Are we going to put in charge, people who, think there are limitations, think that a country that can provide a system where people can benefit and climb up that ladder because of the fruits of their labor and their creativity and their ingenuity and their hard work, and open their own company someday.
Yeah. I'll tell you this, and we got to wrap it up because we're running out of time. I read somewhere that Walz and Harris have never had a private sector job and have never owned a business. They have worked in government their entire lives. And what do they know or understand about capital creation? Nothing. They don't have any experience, right? And the way, and I notice this every time they attack Elon Musk, how flippantly they attack Elon Musk. with all the risks and all the investment and all the capital.
They
that
used
he's
to love
created.
him, didn't they?
They did.
What
But
happened?
he became a free speech guy, and then they turned on him because to them, free speech is not a cherished value, right? Anyway, we hope we've given you something to think about. Thank you so much for joining us. Like and subscribe. It's right below the screen. We look forward to seeing you at our next episode for The Obvious.
And we welcome your comments. Just send them to theobvious@abceastflorida.com.
Thank you.